Hey, I'm back with more historical appreciation films. I worked my way through The Hollow Crown and The War of the Roses. Um, so I'll finish up where I left off on Hollow Crown. Last video I talked about the reign of Richard II. He was essentially overthrown by Henry IV. And Henry IV ruled from 1399 to 1413. He was a conqueror, much more in a warrior's cloth. He's kind of the antithesis of Richard II. He was from John the Gaunt, Edward III, basically Edward III lineage. The film really covers not so much Henry IV, but his son, Prince Harry, who, of course, became Henry V. And it's done in two parts, so it's over 4 hours long. Part one, the part one focuses on the fictional character Falstaff and his relationship with Prince Harry. It's kind of a coming-of-age story, but it's a 2 hour long coming-of-age story, so I much would have preferred more time spent on Henry IV's reign, but unfortunately what we got is really Tom Huddleston coming of age story, which Tom Huddleston's a great actor, don't get me wrong, but I would have preferred more coverage of the actual king and his exploits. Part two is a little more interesting because at this point Henry IV is sick with leprosy, and he's in his mid-40s, and he's dying, essentially. His son, who has a strained relationship with, has helped him in some battles. Henry IV, because he overthrew Richard II, I guess, always lived in fear of someone trying to plot against him to take his throne, and of course, that's really what was happening. His son, Harry, helped put down some of these rebellions, but their relationship was strained. In the second part of it, you kind of get a full flavor of that. They eventually put down a rebellion, and that rebellion is covered in part two of Henry IV. After the rebellion, Henry IV just died, basically, just collapsed and died, either from leprosy or syphilis or something like that, and his son took over. So that moves us to Henry V. And Henry V ruled for about 8 years. He had a very short reign, and he died relatively young from dysentery. He was another warrior, and the big issue here in this part is the famous Battle of Agincourt, where Henry V is going back to France to renew his claim to the lands that his great-great-grandfather Edward III captured through the 40 Years' War. He's going back to recapture the French lands. And that resulted in the famous Battle of Agincourt, where the English won with insurmountable odds. You had like 20-some thousand French soldiers versus the English, but the English had the longbow, and they knew how to use it, and they cut them down, mowed them down, in a famous victory, maybe one of the most famous victories for the English of all time, the Battle of Agincourt. Tom Huddleston is excellent in this, and he makes a great warrior leader. Of course, once the battle is over, then he's ready to make nice, and he marries a French princess. And I guess that was the attempt there, is to try to renew and maintain relations with the French, i.e., in effect, trying to maintain their control over French land by marrying the houses together. That happened quite a bit back then in the medieval times. Of course, their child spawned the next series of films, which is The War of Roses, because Henry V dies at a very young age and leaves a 6 to 9 month old child as the king. and that's going to move us into the War of the Roses, which is this was a 2012 BBC series. In 2016, they made the War of Roses, which covers Henry VI and, of course, Richard III, which rounds it out. So I'll be covering that next, and other things as well. But I think this is a great set, particularly if you're interested. If you have any interest at all at the medieval kings of England, BBC, the series. This was a great series. All the acting in this is top notch, and highly recommended. The only negative I can cast on this is Henry IV, 4 hours. Too much of it was taken up with the fictional character Falstaff. I wanted to see more Henry IV and less of that dynamic, but it's a mild complaint. So with that, I will wrap up the Hollow Crown, and I appreciate you watching.